This is The Law Matters. Of course it does. Hi, I'm Debbie Morais, your host and moderator. As we tell you, this long-running program continues to educate, inform, and help you decide how to protect yourself, your family, and your business when it comes to legal matters. In our very informal discussions, we hope to provide some information and resources that will help you manage whatever issues do come up. And on the other side of it, if you decide to seek outside professional counsel, our goal, as always, is to help you achieve the best possible results while saving time and money. Once again, and as always, we want to welcome and thank Attorney David Bazar from the Bazar and Associates law firm in East Providence, who continues to weigh in on every topic that we discuss. So now, new year, new laws. New laws were taking effect in January of 2024, so we'll discuss some of those today. In Rhode Island, the minimum wage went up $1. It's getting closer to 15. In Massachusetts, it's staying the same, already 15. And of course, the legislature there is pushing to increase that a little bit more. We'll talk about Juneteenth and perhaps some of the other issues that are in Massachusetts. There's things about dental coverage, magic mushrooms even. We'll see what we can cover. But let's start out, David, by explaining, while there are lists of the new laws that took an effect in January of 2024, how does a bill form, evolve, and become law?
Okay. So what happens is a senator or a member of the House of Representatives, at least we'll do Rhode Island as our example, introduces legislation or bill into their particular house, the Senate or the House of Representatives. And then the Speaker of the House, if it's in the House, or the Senate President will refer that bill to the appropriate committee. So if it's a bill on how courts operate, it'll get referred to the Judiciary Committee. If it's a bill on labor, there'll be a labor committee that would get the referral. Then those committees typically will conduct hearings or a study of the bill. People may be invited in to testify or come in to testify on their own on a particular subject or bill that's pending before that committee. And then the committee can vote to recommend passage of the bill as it is, as it was submitted, or with amendments or a substitute bill or something that they think is appropriate based on the bill that was initially introduced. And once they make their recommendation, it goes back to the House or Senate, whichever side it was introduced on, and the House and Senate votes on it. If that passes, then it goes to the opposite chamber, and they do the same thing all over again. If that is then passed, it goes to the governor, who can sign it, veto it, or let it pass into law without signature. If it's vetoed, it goes back to the originating House to vote if they have a 3/5 vote to override the veto, and then if it's on the House side, it goes to the Senate, and they do the same. It can become law over the governor's veto.
Does that take place in every state?
Most states are the same. Some states don't have two chambers. Some states don't have the same process, but the federal process is very similar, and most states do follow a similar process.
So when you pointed out that if it started, say, in the House of Representatives, and they label it H whatever, and it passes, goes through, and it needs to go to then the Senate. The Senate, would they absolutely have a verbatim bill with a different S letter, S plus different numbers? Would it be verbatim? Would it be exactly the same? Would it have some revisions to it? How might that take place?
Yeah, usually it starts out with the same bill because it's the bill that passed the other chamber. So if it's House to the Senate, it goes to the Senate, and it goes through the same process. The bill that comes out of the Senate could be slightly different than the one that came out of the House, so then they have to negotiate. They usually get together and try to make sure that they're on board with the same language so that they can get the bill through. If it's significantly different, if it's a different bill, it's going to have to go back in the opposite direction because the bill that was passed hadn't passed as it was, and if it's totally different or it's sort of rejected unless they can negotiate a compromise of what the bill should be.
So most of us who have followed any kind of laws proposed, laws on the books, laws that might be on the books, are aware that it is a process. You've described the process, and it certainly can become very time-consuming, unwieldy. So where do the glitches happen? When someone is, when one rep or senator is starting to draft or craft a bill, he's getting or she's getting input from whom?
So in terms of drafting it itself,
Yes.
or
Yep.
in terms of input on what should be in it from other people?
From the beginning. Where does the source of input come? When do committee people weigh in, or witnesses, or eventually lobbyists?
So if I'm a House representative and I have an idea for a bill, I might speak to other people in the House to find out what kind of appetite there is for what I'm trying to introduce, maybe even get them to be co-sponsors of the bill. There are folks that work for the House and for the Senate who will help draft it so the language is appropriate, so that all gets done there. And then when that bill has all the input from the folks that you want to get the input from, and you know, a bill can come from outside sources. So for example, the Attorney General of the state of Rhode Island might have an idea on how we should do trials, criminal trials. Is it in fact the state of the law in Rhode Island that only the defendant has the right to waive a jury in the first instance, in a jury trial type of case? Or can the state say, no, we want that jury even if he waives it? And so, which is an issue that the Attorney General has weighed in on. And so if he has an interest in getting that law changed, and I guess that you'd have to also look at what's the Constitution provide for who has the right to the jury trial. But that aside, if he can convince someone in the House or the Senate that this is an important bill and the state should be able to request a jury trial over the objection of the defendant, he would then send that to one of the people he might get to support it. They would weigh in from other folks. They might ask defense lawyers to weigh in on it. They may ask other people to weigh in on it, or they may not. They may just get what information they need. And so let's take that bill, for example, and I would say that that bill maybe would go to let's say it's the Senate that introduces it, the Senate Judiciary Committee. The Senate Judiciary Committee will then take testimony on that bill, and they might hear from defense lawyers. They may hear from public defenders. They may hear from the Attorney General's office. They may hear from other criminal or crime victim advocates. A whole host of people might be interested in that bill. After they have all the testimony on it, they may try to change it slightly. They may not. They may pass it, and then, like I said, it goes out to the Senate floor for a vote. Or if they don't want to deal with it, they might hold it for further study, which is sort of killing the bill in committee.
Killing the bill into a committee. So at what point or points do lobbyists weigh in?
They weigh in that initial stage when the bill is being heard. The lobbyists may go and testify at the committee in favor of a bill or against a bill. I'm sure that they would be lobbying for votes when the bill comes out. So they're a part of the process all the way along.
So it certainly reflects that there are many sources of input, and we understand that that also bogs the system down a little bit, but also theoretically allows everyone who should have a dog in the fight or information that needs to be included, make sure that it's included. So why are some things that seem so obvious, why do some of them take such a long time to have them pass? So for example, what is it? Juneteenth. In Rhode Island, as of January 1st, it is now a holiday. Who would have a reason to oppose that? Why would it take long? Other states have had it. We do now. I'm not sure if Mass does. I think they do. I understand that's going to impact on workers and their wages and whether or not they get a day off or how much they're getting paid. So maybe that's one of the groups that might have, someone has a dog in the fight relative to labor. Why would that have ever taken any time at all to become a law?
So your premise is it doesn't seem like this would be controversial.
Right.
Why wouldn't it just pass right out of the gate? But every law has an impact or an effect beyond the law itself. So even though I agree with you, this shouldn't be a controversial thing. This should just be, yeah, that makes sense. It does impact other things. And you raised the one that I would have talked about the most, which is business. I'm now going to pay for another day off. If that affects multiple businesses, then a lot of the lobbyists that lobby on behalf of businesses might weigh in on that. And they might weigh in on the fact that if I have a business that's going to have to stay open during that now holiday, it's time and a half, I believe. So it's costing me more money. Or it's a vacation day that I'm paying for that I wouldn't have to otherwise pay for, so I'm unproductive that day. So it's not controversial, but it has an impact. And those impacts always need to be studied and weighed and balanced against what it is you're trying to accomplish versus what unintended consequences might come up.
Yep. So the single-use plastic bags have become banned. Other states had passed that law prior to our doing it, but it's going to happen now. Seems like that would be an okay thing. There have been selling bags. They've had people who've purchased their bags from other merchants or whatever, and they can use their own. So now retail establishments can no longer make available any single-use plastic. Bring your own, or you're going to pay for one. Who would have a dog in the fight with that? Probably the retailer who doesn't want to. Well, he's going to be able to sell it, so what would be his dog in the fight?
Well, there's a number of different groups, again, that might have a consequence that they don't really, that needs to be discussed as part of that. So again, like the holiday, you'd say, what's controversial about that? We're saving the environment, we're helping the environment. Well, if you eliminate those bags, which perhaps were much less expensive than the paper bag that's going to be in its place, what you might see happen is, mostly, let's say, a grocery store, they may start charging for the paper bags. So if you ever check out at the grocery store, self-checkout, they might start asking you, how many bags did you use?
And they do.
And you might start paying for those bags. So it's a consequence. Is the downside of that consequence outweighed by the improvement to the environment that you would see? Probably the ways in favor of passing that bill. But again, I think if I'm sitting there being asked to vote on a bill, I like the process of having the committees hear this testimony and hear all the things, so I know what is the possible, I don't see a downside to this, I'm just going to vote for it. Well, no, I want to know what the downside might be. What are the consequences?
And that should take place.
Yes.
It makes sense that there should be that discussion, and that's what's supposed to happen on the floor. And I guess that's why we've taken the time to set this up. I mean, these two laws that I've given to you to discuss, there's kind of low-hanging fruit. There are others certainly that are contentious, that are controversial.
Well, when we use this, the hypothetical, which is about who has the right to demand a jury. Is it the defendant's right in a criminal trial to demand a jury or the state's right? There's going to be controversy on that because of what is the purpose of having a jury trial and whose rights are we protecting? And the Attorney General wants to assert that, well, the state has an interest, the victims of the crime have an interest in being allowed to claim a jury or not. What's the Constitution say, I think, is another issue.
Voting law has changed. A 17-year-old can now register to vote and assume that they're going to be 18 by the time they're registered and the election comes. Someone might have a dog in that fight. Of course, I have my opinion, personal opinion, is that if you don't follow what's going on and if you are uninformed, please don't vote. But that's an aside. Interestingly enough, many teachers were advocating for this bill because they were saying that many young people these days are following what's going on, which certainly is a very positive commentary. But I think that's been something that they've been trying to put through for several years, and I don't know if other states have that. Care to weigh in on it?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting issue. But to be clear about it, what the law says is that you can register to vote and vote in a primary at 17 if you'll be 18 by the time the general election comes. And I think the idea or thinking behind that is if you're going to vote in the general election, you ought to have some say on who's going to be on the ballot by voting in the primary if you're old enough to vote if you're 18 at the time of the general election. From a teacher's perspective, I think it might generate more interest in the student if you're teaching a course in school
Civics or social studies.
Yeah, social, whatever it might be, where politics or people running are part of the curriculum or what you might be teaching, they'd have more interest in understanding and knowing what's going on if they know that they're going to have the opportunity to vote in that primary.
And another issue that came up was the state ID cards for undocumented immigrants. Certainly, immigration is a hot item across the country. In Rhode Island, the undocumented immigrants will be able to be issued a state identification card from the Division of Motor Vehicles, as long as they have certain documents, as they say. That would include tax verification letters, 2 types of identification, and 2 documents verifying residency. Who has a dog in the fight against that?
Well, it's...
Or what's that about?
Yeah. So they have already, some time ago, I don't know, year or two, whatever it was, passed the law about having the ability to get a driver's license. And the thought on that was and is, you want to be able to regulate who's driving.
That was a Governor Chafee, wasn't that?
I believe it might have been. Might have been. I know he would have advocated for it. And so if somebody's here, they've been here for a while, they're working, they're otherwise productive members of our society, but they didn't arrive here or overstayed a visa, however it is that they're here, the public safety interest, I think, would outweigh any other interest in the driver's license side of it. So now to have an ID is sort of a natural extension of that. You're not going to get the public safety argument as much,
right.
But it's just, it's sort of like if I'm a person who was born here and I don't have a driver's license, how am I going to go cash a check? I need that ID. Same idea. People who are just so upset with the federal immigration policies would probably be those that might object to this. Right. But it's not an immigration issue. They're already here.
Yes.
It's the immigration issue of how people get here is a federal issue, and it really needs, I think it's like 2013 since any law was passed federally, and it actually didn't pass. I think it may have passed the Senate and didn't even get voted on or taken up in the House, which was a bipartisan, like 60 Senate vote in favor of a comprehensive bill on immigration. And that's the last time anything passed either house. And it's really a sad situation that the federal government can't sit down and, with bipartisan support, figure out what is the solution to the immigration issue. And it is an issue, and it needs to be addressed. But this isn't really an immigration issue. It's an issue about how we're going to treat people who are here.
Once they're here, right. Yeah. And of course, immigration issue is an issue, but we can put people on the moon, as they say, and go to Mars. Right. A different story. So apparently, landlords, rental agencies, property managers can't charge application fees anymore, except there are some exceptions. I didn't even know that I have property. I didn't even know that people would consider charging an application fee to a particular or someone who's going to rent. Why would they be doing that? I mean, I understand criminal checks, background checks.
Yep. So that's the exception, is if the person who wants to rent the property doesn't have the ability to provide you with a criminal background check.
And you have to pay for it.
And you have to pay for it. You can charge for that. But you can't charge a fee for the application, which would seem to be reasonable because if you're not going to get the apartment, you can't be spending lots of money on different applications. And this, I think, really sort of goes back to there's a shortage of housing.
Yes.
And people are going to apply to multiple places because you don't know if you're going to get the next one, because there could be 10 people applying to get that particular apartment. And it's not as if the landlord should be allowed to charge, I don't know if there was a number on what there was you were allowed to charge.
I didn't see it, but I know I've never
But
done.
even if it was $100 and you get 10 applications and you get $1,000 before you even accept one, it's really the person who has to apply multiple places with. You can't tap into all that income just to apply. So that's the logic on it. And of course, on the other side, if you're a landlord and you've got to go through all those applications, you would want to have your lobbyist, if there is one for you, go in and testify that, no, this is a time-consuming, expensive process that I have to weed through all of these things, so I should be allowed to charge for that.
And I'm on the hook if that person isn't a good person for whatever, however you define good or whatever.
Yeah, or appropriate.
Or whatever. The other side of it is apparently, excuse me, people who are renting now can deduct, was $125 up to $500 for repairs. Right. Interesting, because I always thought that landlords were supposed to be doing all of the repairs, but not all of them.
This is a call that lawyers get a lot. I told my landlord this wasn't working or that wasn't working. Can I withhold rent? And, you couldn't. Now, at one point in time, you could withhold, what, 125?
120. Now it's 500.
Yeah, now it's 500. And what I always tell people is if you're going to withhold the rent for something that you had to fix because you gave notice and it wasn't fixed and it's not your responsibility, it's the landlord's responsibility, I still recommend two things. Number one, make sure you have the receipts for what you withheld and put money in escrow. When I say escrow, set it aside. Just know it's there. So when they come and they try to evict you for not paying your rent, you can say, no, I sent this letter. Here's the letter. What do we always say? Document everything. Put it in writing. I sent the letter. Here it is. I sent it by email. Here it is. No response. Here's the receipt for what I did. In fact, I sent a copy of the receipt to the landlord with my check saying I've withheld $327.50 to fix this, this, and this, and here's the receipt for payment of that. So now you have a paper trail to protect yourself.
Suppose the landlord didn't want to pay or have those things repaired. Suppose they didn't have to.
Well, they should have responded in writing to you when you said this needs to be fixed. Nope, that's your responsibility, not mine. And then you have your paper trail, you can fight it out.
So if we're presenting one side of it, there's the other side. Of course, when we talk about housing, there were certainly many issues brought up in this year's new laws that we could spend an entire session on, how things are being changed, but how zoning is going to change, how parking lots are going to be changing, and how they're going to be able to convert commercial use building to mixed use and residential. But that's a whole, I think that could almost be an entire show in and of itself. Nurses, there's a nursing shortage, not just in Rhode Island, not just in Massachusetts, across the country. A new healthcare law, many are changing anyway, but nurses with license in more than one state will be allowed to practice in Rhode Island now without having to get a Rhode Island-only license. Right. Interesting. Why would that have ever become an issue, and how do you weigh in on that,
Yeah,
David?
so it's because of a shortage of healthcare professionals, nurses in this particular instance, and the need to staff hospitals and nursing homes and all sorts of other things. And so this is a weighing and balancing thing. We want to make sure that we're staffing them with highly trained professionals that are licensed. Prior to this law, the theory was, well, we want to make sure you are up to snuff for Rhode Island to qualify to get your license in Rhode Island. Well, we need to get people. That need for people, bodies, outweighs the theory of, well, I need you to pass the Rhode Island license. As long as we know you've met the criteria in multi-states and have those licenses, we'll let you do it in Rhode Island.
Sounds right. So in Massachusetts, the thought is that many of the COVID-inspired laws are about to end, but they're also going to be trying to postpone and keep some of them going. Obviously, with COVID laws now expiring, there's going to be a money crunch. It's dried up, and so it seems that every state is going to look for more new and more ways of extracting some funds. However, we did hear, I think it was last night, in fact, that in the state of Massachusetts, they're looking at changing the amount of money that they're going to charge corporations, or maybe even in Rhode Island, they might. I think Governor McKee might lower it for $50. It's interesting to see that there are some laws that are being proposed, not all of them that have been fleshed out yet, that might actually work in someone's benefit rather than to someone's detriment.
That'll be discussion in 2025. But interestingly enough, on taxes and that type of thing, Massachusetts had a number of changes in taxes, but one of the most interesting ones for the work that I do is estate tax. And in fact, it was made retroactive for anyone who died in 2023. And they increased the threshold to $2 million for what estates are taxable in Massachusetts. And again, controversy? No, but the state probably wanted to study what is the economic impact on that, how are we going to make up for that money, versus what is the benefit of keeping people in Massachusetts instead of moving to Florida or New Hampshire or other states.
Right, that makes sense too. So in Massachusetts, there's an issue too about if you wanted to file jointly or separately.
Right.
Can you do federally, jointly, statewide,
right.
individually? That's certainly something that has an economic impact.
And so that is actually because of the Massachusetts so-called millionaires tax.
The millionaires tax,
so
yes.
In Massachusetts, if you file a federal tax return, the tax return, if your income is going to be over $1 million, but there's a benefit federally to file as a married
couple
joint. Whereas there's a, I think, 4% surcharge. If your income's over $1 million and you file jointly, you're over $1 million. But if you filed separately, you'd be under. So they're saying if you file jointly federally, you have to do it on the state return as well.
It's interesting. I guess on the COVID side of it too, restaurants that were allowed to have grab and go and package up your alcohol can't happen any longer in Rhode Island. They're looking at extending that in Massachusetts. Restaurateurs aren't happy, liquor stores aren't. Right. You know, there's always
those are the two sides of the coin that you say both will want to weigh in on that.
And one other one that crossed my mind as I was reading this was in Massachusetts, psilocybin, better known as the magic mushroom, has now become law for those who have PTSD. Interesting, that must have been an FDA thing, right?
Yeah, well, it's also the marijuana laws from state to state, which are, passing to make it legal versus federally it's not. And that's creating some issues, and that needs to be looked at on the federal level.
How many years more will that take in terms of lobbyists from state to state and everything?
Yeah. It'll
continue. The one last thing I think I wanted to mention was that, what was this? There was one more dental. There's a dental law in Massachusetts now. At least there's going to be more coverage, a positive thing. Do you want to weigh on?
No, it's again, they have to look at it, and this is going to be an insurance company versus the consumer type of thing. But yeah, it's a good law that passed in Mass on that.
So clearly there are some advantages to some of these laws. I often wonder why some of the things that sound like common sense, why they'd have to be legislated, but they do. And I think it's good for our viewers to get a chance to hear the pros and cons so that they understand what it takes to have a law actually pass. We hope that this has been helpful to you in thinking about how laws will impact on you in 2024. Thank you for staying tuned to The Law Matters. As we say, it matters to you.